Thanks again for sharing your wisdom with the group this morning. We heard a lot of interesting dialogue, and I bet we could be here probably till, well, for hours. Here we go. Is there a volunteer who would like to start the round?
What ran through my mind is this, our world is separated into them and us, and a lot that is relevant to what we've discussed here is them, the politicians, and us, the citizens, as though we're two separate things. And my view is that the politicians actually reflect us, because that's how they get there. They weren't beamed down. And I believe if we look at the different phases the humans on Earth have gone through, from the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, and so on and so forth, the Industrial Revolution, and then I was a child of the Depression. And since then, I have really noticed the strong phase of what I call narcissistic consumerism is driving it, and that's calling on one of those characteristics inherent in all of us is greed, and it's what's driving us, and it's what's reflecting the politicians that are in power. And I think the one fellow that spoke about volunteerism is such an important part of how those that aren't caught up in this greed, because there are many, many humans in our society that aren't, but we're struggling, fighting, keeping thinking that government should be doing more, but it has to keep coming from us and using that force. One of the examples I see of how it's reflected is I get emails regularly from people that I care about, that I love, with unbelievable hostility towards the immigrants, the Tamil ships that came in. They're unbelievable comments. And I'll stop quickly, but that reflects the fear of losing what we have, which also reflects our greed. And if we can just keep working as volunteers to keep the movement going, to try and counterbalance that. So I'll pass it on.
My thoughts are about community and criminal justice and government, I guess. System that we have, that we're operating with, was designed in the 1800s, coming out of the 1700s Enlightenment thinking and 1800s. Yet the 20th century was a century of enormous changes in technology and transportation. I mean, we live in mobile societies, not static societies like we did in the 1800s, when the dominant mode of transportation was horse and buggy and bicycle. And now we live at a time when, airplanes, and we do space travel. And it's astounding to me that we think that we can live with systems that were designed in a completely different era. And if we just tinker with them a little bit, that somehow will make them relevant for the current era. I think it's time we put everything out on the table. I can't think of anything. It's not about, I come from a family of government workers and from a government town. I come from Ottawa, and it's a very, very unwieldy process to move something from an idea to an action process, just because of the nature of bureaucracy and the sort of layers of accountability that we've built into things. It's much more efficient to just do things in communities, I think, rather than doing it the other way. And I think, like, best example would be just something that comes to mind is the problem of homelessness in the United States. You have all these people who are being turfed out of their houses because they can't pay their mortgages because they've lost their jobs, and then they have a problem of homeless people. If somebody came from another planet and saw the situation, they'd say, well, you have all these empty houses and you have all these homeless people. I mean, how can you solve that problem? It seems pretty simple to us, but because we have all these layers of rationale and policy and ideology that separates the two, we can't act on simple solutions for serious problems because we have all these unwieldy processes. So I'm I'm thinking it's time that we put all the stuff on the table and start throwing out the stuff that isn't relevant and doesn't work and is inefficient for what our needs are right now, and that includes a lot of government processes. The government is us. I mean, I agree with Barb in that sense. We can't be blaming it, and a lot of us have sort of bought our exclusion from the process by paying taxes and saying that, you know, now I don't have to be worried about it. And then we can blame everything on the government too, and it doesn't work. So I think it's really important that we take that back, and that's why I said a couple of weeks ago at the Ting Forum, yeah, you don't need money, and I think some people were shocked, including some of the faces of people who worked in government there. We can just do it on our own. And when you do it on their own, all of a sudden, and they realize they need to get it, come up with the money and participate with you. You don't have to ask government people to lead. I think community should lead. It's just my personal opinion.
I think I'm going to have to think about that a little bit more, but I'll try and formulate some thoughts. I really do agree that, you know, all of this does belong in the communities, and that's really where change comes from. I think, you know, I'm meditating on what Ali was speaking about earlier, and continuation of some of the things Liz has said. One of my challenges, I think, in this field is, you know, there is an aspect of money that is important because, you know, trying to survive in this world is really difficult, and trying to survive in the city is really difficult. And a part of my challenge in my work is trying to support my family, but still do what I love and do what my heart feels is right. And I just find that that's a really difficult dilemma for me continuously. How to, you know, you were talking about that whole notion of professionalism in the RJ field, and I know, as Juan was saying, you know, there is a standardization and an institutionalization of that. But at the same time, a part of what I heard you saying was, you know, that need to get paid for the work that we do as well, so that we can feed our families and that we can continue the work that we do. And so I guess that's kind of the struggle that I'm going to throw out to the circle. And you know, I believe that volunteerism is extremely important, but at the same time, my need to support my family and to stay afloat prevents me from being able to volunteer and to give my time up in that way. But then how to continue the work that I do, and most of it is volunteer, is quite a dilemma. So I'll leave it there for right now.
I think that's something that I tried to consider when I taught at Simon Fraser a few years back, and may again. How do we ask students to seriously consider careers in criminal justice, and especially around restorative or transformative justice, when basically we're saying, well, we can educate you in these things and hope to inspire you so that you develop passions for these same values and principles, so that you can go out and volunteer and starve like others. And for me, of course, that was a little bit hypocritical, because I did have a job, a full-time salary, and as a director of a nonprofit organization. I'm just trying to pull some threads together here, thinking about the whole question of community and the communitarian aspect of what it is we're doing. I love working for a nonprofit, for a community nonprofit. We've been able to accomplish some things I know we never could have done if we'd been a government organization. Simply because we didn't have to ask permission. We could do things, we could test ideas, we could try them, we could work at them even without funding for long enough that the government came alongside and said, geez, you know, maybe that is a good idea. Or gave us a couple of years of pilot project funding, only to discover that, you know, 20 years in, they're still funding that pilot project. And in ways that have enabled us to make the rules about what it is and what we do, rather than have to kowtow to somebody else who's trying to impose standards and qualifications and all that sort of thing. I get nervous with that sort of talk. From the very beginning, I always have. Way back to the early community mediation programs, when people like Albie Davis were writing amazing things like, You know, the difficulty with professionalization and standards or standardization is that what usually happens is if there's any lucre-generating work to be done, the folks manage to kind of corral that on the basis of credentials or credentialing or standards, and then they pour hot oil on anybody who would attempt to scale the ramparts. And that seems to be the way that professionalization and standardization stuff tends to work. At any rate, I get a lot of airtime in a lot of spaces, and I think I'm going to leave it just there for today. Otherwise, I start trying to unravel what I just said, and I'm not sure I can even do that.
In New Zealand and even Australia, when I've said, you know, I've asked, so what's the solution for Indigenous people? And I say, we'll just do it for ourselves. I've been called naive, you know, or some people go, well, that's not that easy. The issue of finance and money, people got to make a living and what have you, is a concern. But I do, and I want to emphasize, I do point to some of the areas where we have done things for ourselves, like education, and clearly, you know, although the government takes credit for the massive increase in number of Māori going through tertiary now and the increase in success at schools, and funny enough, aren't interested in doing any research in the link between our schooling systems that have been in place for 25 years now and these issues, you know, which I find quite interesting. You know, so, you know, we are advantaged in some ways. We do have a meaningful treaty settlement process. It ain't perfect, but it is giving us the financial clout. Unlike other First Nations like Australia where I live, because if you want to see, the things were pretty bad here in terms of the colonial context. If you want to see the effect of really bad effect of negative consequences of colonisation, you go to Australia and have a look at the Aboriginal peoples over there, and even the racist policy that Australian government makes now. I have to acknowledge, you know, we're 14.5% of the population. It's 550,000 people self-identify as Māori out of 4.2 million. That's a big block. That's a huge block of voting power and political power. So I guess I want to just address that, you know, because other people have said to me here, what your strategy is unrealistic in the Australian context or the Canadian context in that. I actually don't believe it. I mean, the time I've spent here, I've seen what the Stalo are doing in terms of Storm and other things, and know that is actually, that, you know, there is some, we can empower ourselves through simply rejecting top-down standardised programs or what have you. We can, sometimes we've got to start on the smell of an oily rag and run things on a shoestring. There's a streak of volunteerism going through our community because of our social and cultural obligations, and we're lucky that a lot of our successful programs are based on people who did it for nothing. Well, nothing is in terms of money in the European context of nothing, but the rest of the community would come around and support them and feed them and house them and all those sort of things, you know. So I'll stop there because I could go on about that for...
There's so many things that I can relate to in what's been said. 30 years ago, I quit a government job, a lucrative government job, because I wasn't able to work at the grassroots level with Aboriginal youth as I wanted to. Not being Aboriginal myself, it was very idealistic, I think, but since that time I've worked with the Elizabeth Fry Society, and then over the last 20 years I have just been a community volunteer. And with all of the activist work that I have done, I have found through a learning process that the most radical thing that I could do was to help to empower families, to help families understand their responsibilities and the need for peace in the home, and the importance of looking after one another. And that's, as my best teacher, my husband, has told me, the place where restorative justice always begins is in the home. So I think that my question regarding motherhood and other issues has to do with volunteerism, but it has to do with, most of all, with recognizing our responsibilities to one another, where we are, and how we can make things better and healed in our own lives, and on that basis help out in our communities. And everything starts from that level. So I think volunteerism is the answer, and being responsible with our families and our friends is a big part of that. That's about all I have to say.
Hi, everybody. This is a strange-looking talking stick. Anyway, I've heard a lot here today, and I'm always learning. I'm not an expert on restorative justice. I choose to call it that because it's what we recognize it here at the grassroots level. At least we know what we're talking about. And what I think one of the ways that needs to happen is that the whole community, everyone has to know what we're talking about, restorative justice. So we need to educate one another at every level, not just government, but right down to the schools, especially with our children, the education system, and communities, grassroots, families, and so on. I think that inclusiveness is a word that I use a lot. I'm tired of fighting. I know how to fight, and it's not effective. I like the other way of. There's a saying I've been using lately. Is I don't know who coined it. It's do not resist evil, but allow love. Something like that. Means that I've given up fighting, and I work with that value of inclusiveness. Include everyone. I'm not us and them anymore. It was important for me at one time to be Ojibwe, Anishinaabe. Those are my roots. And I used to tell my son, when you bury me in Batchewana beside my dad, and right on our ancestral land. And lately I've been telling him, I said, you know, when I croak, son, surprise me. Bury me wherever you want, because I'm at home anywhere I am at. And I really have to espouse the principles that our old people talked about, is that we're all related. We're all related, and include the earth as well. That's a strong value among our people, our Mother Earth. Include her in justice as well. So I'm very excited about this topic, and I know it's not the panacea, but it sure is up there with motherhood and apple pie.
Lately, I've been thinking a lot about families and the family unit, and one of the reasons is a comment that Barry Stewart made. I think most of you know Barry is a prominent figure in this field of work and others. But he comes to deliver a full day of training to our volunteers, and he made a comment just before he left at the end of a full day's training, almost kind of an offhand remark, but he said, "It's all about the family." And that was kind of his final remark. But in any event, I think that today we're talking in large measure about gangs, and it strikes me that that issue and so many others have to do with the family unit and support of the family unit. And therefore, when we're talking about gangs, we're also talking then about affordable housing. And we're talking about the cost of living, and we're talking about food security. And we're talking about all those things that provide the ingredients for a family unit, not necessarily to be materially rich, but to have the opportunity, at least not ongoing chaos and stress, but to just have a space where love can flourish. It would seem that our pace is so rapid and the stimulation levels are so high, and at the end of the day the family unit gets left in the dust, and of course that means that the kids often, it seems to me, get the short end of the stick. And so yeah, I think that so many of these conversations are really come down to some, not dry necessarily, but rather disjointed topics, as I said: cost of living, affordable housing, food security. All of those things are just, they have to be part of this conversation. As well as, I think a few people have alluded to the fact that when you live in a community and perhaps everything is doing just nicely underneath your roof and in your yard, the obligation to your community hasn't ended. There is an obligation to engage and to do your piece, so to speak. And again, perhaps it is the busyness of our lives where, although we may recognize that, we'll do that next week or something. And I have to say also at the same time, we are very fortunate, our community is very fortunate, and I think many are. The people who do engage and do what they can. But I just wanted to make that comment, that there are so many other topics that are about the family unit, and to, I think, make a difference in gang activity and the outcomes, that's a really important component to focus on.
Where do you start? There have been lots of different ideas, great food for thought today. You talk about family. I remember when Liz came to our training and just broke down what a gang is all about. It's about family for those that aren't finding family in the traditional fashion. Restorative justice. It's about taking responsibility, repairing, restoring, rebuilding. We're all responsible for how we walk our journey called life. We look to the politicians to make the decisions for us. It's not their responsibility, or it's their responsibility to act responsibly for us, but we have to tell them what that looks like. We have to be more proactive in that fashion. We have to all start taking a different responsibility for our own families, for our own lives, for our own beings. I find this really interesting because I happened to hear a politician the other night, Ken Dryden, talking about becoming Canada, talking about how Canada is multicultural versus multicultural, and how we all have to learn to live together, how we have to go beneath what the media is putting in the newspapers as our priority. We have to start having some very real, serious conversations about the real issues. And I think that that's what Juan is saying. And I think in some respects, naivety or ignorance is bliss in this. If we stop asking all these questions and asking what the protocol is to do, and we just start doing, more politicians are going to have to come on board in a different kind of way, because it will just grow, and they will not be able to ignore. And the policies may change.
I feel very blessed to have participated in this forum today, and my hands go up to our guest speaker and the collective knowledge in this room. It's a lot of information for me to process, and as I was listening, I was thinking, wow, Darla, you really need to get more education, and I was really stimulated through this afternoon, and I was reminded during the break from a friend of mine that a lot of the work that I do isn't just from up here, but from in here. It's from my heart, and every day I work from my heart with my youth, and I do have about 3 youth within my youth center that have been in a gang, and 2 of them, life after getting out has been really challenging. And RJ work through Mission Restorative Resolutions, the training that I took back to my workplace, I started circles, and circles are very well known in my culture as a First Nations woman, and but the actual the RJ part of it was being able to move that talking piece back and forth between the 2 parties without them interrupting. In my culture, what I have learned is that the teachings come from our elders, and through other sacred things like sweat lodge and sweating, smudging, and other forms, fasting, other ways of prayer and help, and it's community, not just the person that was harmed and the person that did harm. There's much more, and so it's, for me, it's still a learning road, and it's one that I've been interested ever since I was young, and only want to keep growing and learning more. And I see that RJ is working within my workplace. I use it regularly with my youth, and it could be a silly little disagreement about a video game to an actual fight right there in the youth center. And but I use it for every little dilemma that we have, and I've noticed that my youth are more open with me now, and they come to me more often, and I feel honored by that. And again, I just want to thank everybody for sharing today, and I look forward to what I'm going to walk away with from this afternoon. All my relations.
It's wonderful to see this collective wisdom gathered here. Lately, I am struck by the idea that the system is producing exactly what it's asked for. With industrialization came the idea of economies of scale, and we asked the government to collect up our economies of scale and spend it in good ways. And when we questioned that, we asked them to be accountable, and as we asked them to be accountable, they developed policies to be sure that they're accountable to us. And those policies have developed in one step, and it's a cycle around and around, and we get caught up in this cycle of, have you been accountable? Have you done the right thing? Should you put another policy in place to make sure that you get these economies of scale for us? And in the midst of it, each one of us has our own individual lives, our own hand of cards dealt to us that may or may not include a stable family, that may never fit into the policy parameters that are then put in place while this cyclical argument continues on. And I think the wisdom that I have found in restorative justice is the transformation. I really resonate with that change in language because it is about individual transformation. I feel like we've been distracted from the issue by trying to hold government accountable. The only trick in it is when you say, well, maybe the government can stop, is that they never seem to give back the money that they were using to develop those policies and be accountable to us. And so I have to agree with the sentiment that each of us acting individually is much more powerful than a policy. And ultimately, if we have success as individuals, then that's where the attention will be attracted.
Thank you, Maggie. It's been a long time before I was in a circle, so I don't know what kind of thoughts I gather. One thing that strikes me probably most is the us and them thing. I never believe in us and them because when we do that, one or both sides will lose something. Because I always feel everybody is in one big community, may it be a basic unit, family unit, to professionals, trades, up to the politician, governments, they're all in one family. And I always believe that politicians they go into politics for a good intention. They try to get information to keep their job, and those information come from all of us. Those information are what we try to reflect. Hey, this is what will suit our lives. So I guess our part would be to inform them that, hey, to keep your job, this is what we want. A few years ago, I asked in a RJ conference, I asked a panel of presenters, I said, if RJ movement were asked to go mainstream back then about 3 years ago, are we ready? Since my first experience with restorative justice or transformative justice, my journey grows. However, the whole movement has not moved beyond very much in that so-called hierarchy level. But do we need to go mainstream? Why? Why do we need to go mainstream? I'm not saying that, it's nice and tidy that we have a little group here. We enjoy our company. We share thoughts. Everything is comfortable. Why don't we just leave it there? But we want to go out of it because we want everybody to have that experience. But does that go mainstream? So just the one thought that I always struggle.
One of the thoughts, actually a couple of thoughts that I've had a lot of thoughts today sitting here and listening. And I guess first off, I just want to say that I'm feeling really thankful to be participating here today with such with such knowledge and wisdom around me. One of the things that was raised was accountability. And I remember I homeschooled my kids up to high school. And I remember when I was homeschooling them, I remember a lot of the neighbors would be questioning me about everything. And one of the things that they asked me often was, how do you test them? How does the school hold you accountable? How do they know that they're going to be at the same level as everybody else? And I said, I remember thinking that was such a weird question to me, and it just didn't make sense. And I remember saying, shouldn't it be the other way around? I mean, nobody's going to want more for these kids than I do. Shouldn't you be thinking about how you're holding the school accountable to you instead of the other way around? And so that was just raised when I'm hearing accountability and family, and that's where it should start. And I think that that's kind of the essence of restorative justice. Is it's not about, to me, a whole policy. It's about the values, and I think that that's what I'm taking away from here today. I haven't been able to volunteer out in BC yet because I'm new to BC, and so I'm sort of feeling like I'm not contributing a lot, and I'm not doing a lot in the restorative justice field. But doing my coursework at SFU, I'm submerged in the criminology department, struggling with how to keep on bringing restorative justice into the conversation. And people keep telling me to put my rose-tinted glasses back on. But this week I'm doing a presentation, and I've been struggling because it's a lot of section 642 and section this and section that. And the struggle that I've had is that I don't want to talk about those sections. And so what I'm taking away from this is I'm going to talk about the values instead, and see how that goes. Thank you.
Lots of thoughts going on in my head, but I think that sometimes we want to change the whole world, and we don't really realize that we are changing the whole world in a very small way, but a very impactful way. And what struck me when our speaker was talking was caring. You know, as you were talking about the bureaucrats and choosing not to listen and coming up with policies that weren't based in solid research, I just kept thinking, caring, where is the caring? Where is the caring? And then I just thought about when I was in public education, and I thought, where was my caring as I was gleefully booting children out of secondary school that were irritating me. And then life took a turn, and thanks to my friend here, I ended up in prison.
and teaching some of the very people that I gleefully booted out. And the interesting thing about teaching prisoners is they are so hard on themselves. Unbelievable. Because I guess, and they don't talk about it because they're so, could be, when they do talk about it, it's just that they're overwhelmed with shame around some of the things that they've done. But what struck me as I came into contact with some of my former students that I booted out of high school is how forgiving they were of what I did to them. And no, you tried. They said, you tried. And I said, no, I don't think I tried hard enough. And no, you tried. It just didn't work. It just didn't work. And so I'm still trying to learn this whole, navigate my way through this whole correctional world. But one thing that I have learned, and I'm extremely proud of, is that caring works. And that, you know, the first time I met a student and I kicked him out of school, well, I've got my second chance now, and I'm choosing not to do that. And they're responding. And when you see somebody who's on the so-called inside actually get to the point where they say, you know what, in and out, I'm finished with that, I'm done. I'm gonna see what this institution has to offer me to help me, and I'm gonna see if that kind of works, and I'm gonna stop doing the drugs, and I'm gonna stop doing stuff. And that's really powerful. And it just, when you were talking, sir, it reminded me of what you said about your Native community saying, you know what, we're going to do it anyway. We asked the government to fund schools or whatever, or develop our own self-government, but they said, no, we're going to do it anyway. And that's what I see with a lot of the fellas on the inside that I have contact with, is they're doing it anyway, against the greatest odds, and they're doing it. And they're trying to move forward. And I just try to really keep it down at the ground level and not worry about the larger bureaucracy that is a complete mystery to me, that this is how my tax dollars are being spent. But, you know, I just try to keep it at that level with my students to see how I can facilitate helping them move on. And to see the power of that.
No one said this was going to be easy, I believe, and it certainly isn't. I think this transformational justice, restorative justice, is really, I see as part of the world peace movement, if you will. And we cannot rely on experts to solve the really big issues of our planet. It hasn't worked for climate change, doesn't work for solving problems of world hunger, and it won't work for solving problems at this fundamental level of treating each other in the ways that we would like to treat people. And so, first, I think the idea of relying on professionals and experts to lead the way and rely on them to solve our problems doesn't really work at that fundamental level, and that we all need to be involved. And that really, I think, for me, has meant owning everything about our issues, not passing them over to other people, but at the same time not despairing because the job is difficult, because it was never meant to be easy. We have a monumental task before us. I think us as individuals should always keep the faith and do what we can do in our individual work and take comfort in knowing that we are making a difference with the individuals that we come in contact every day. And I see that for myself personally. And I have no reason to believe that the direction that we are all going in doesn't make a difference for people. I think on a government level, on a societal level, it does take collective effort. And I think we're capable of doing that. But I don't think we should necessarily despair that this is not possible. I think we just need to keep on talking amongst ourselves, knowing that having circles, having dialogue with people in the community, and introducing them to the ideas of restorative justice is really important. And that's individual action that we can all take. I believe that a lot of people still hold to a disease model of treating justice and crime and harm, and feel that the solution is kind of cut out the diseased part of our society to other them. That doesn't really work in health either. That's kind of emergency treatment. You want to be a little bit more proactive about your health. You want to do everything that's possible to create the kind of communities that we want to, so that people feel fully invested in our way of life and can take part. And I think we should approach it like that. We should definitely make sure that we're investing a lot of energy in the building of communities and having the kind of relationships and forging them and being models for the kind of people that we would like to see as our neighbors and friends, right? And we can all do that individually. And it doesn't take a lot of dollars, it just takes the will to do it, and the willingness to acknowledge that it's us individually that creates the conditions for this to happen. So I like to think that we're doing that now. And I don't think we need to kind of always think that we need to approach the higher powers to give us permission to do that and find ways to make the job easier for us. We're just going to do it anyway, I think, and that's the approach we should do.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, I want to echo that as well. I think that when you start to realign your values with institutions and practices that inherently defy your values, that you're treading, you're going in a path that maybe you don't feel good about or feel right about, and I totally agree with that. It's interesting though when I think about, especially around the youth gang issue. I work for a youth research agency, nonprofit, and we do different program evaluations. And we're currently, of course, the government's throwing money, because in Canada, or in our area right now, there's this big thing on gangs, and there has been an influx of homicides. And so the government, it's caught the government's eye. And so they want to do evaluations, and they have youth programming implemented. And something funny that's coming up is, well, none of these youth are identifying as being in a gang. So what's happening is they've been put in programs that they're in for because they're identified as gang members. But when they go and fill in these evaluation forms, they don't identify as gang members. So that obviously doesn't work in trying to implement good programming or anything. But then you have a program such as something like the Partners in Learning program, where we go into the custody center, or the Partners in Learning group goes into the custody center, and you have people with the experience of being in the custody center coming in and talking with youth who are experiencing that now, and the effectiveness of that is just surreal. And the connections that are just made without even a word said. It's almost like they sit down in a circle and these connections are just made, and the questions come out, and the curiosity and the learning that, I don't know, it's something that I've been witness to, and it's amazing, I think. And unfortunately, how do you evaluate that? How do you put that into words? I mean, I try and think about a way to do that, because I have a part of me in there that feels like it would be really valuable to continue that. And that something like that program struggles. And then something where a program is thoroughly evaluating each day or each hour that they're with these youth, and they get tons of money. They get tons of money to evaluate, and they get tons of money to practice. And then you have a program that struggles and is doing an amazing job, effective-wise. Like, these youth are opening up and they're talking about their needs and the reasons why they're engaged. It shouldn't be youth gangs. It should be young people who aren't having their needs met and are doing it because through criminal ways, because that's all they know how to do, or not that they know how to do, but that they've been taught, or etc. So it's interesting to try and find a way that would work effectively, I guess, at addressing the issue of youth gangs within the current structures and institutions that be. I struggle with that. So I feel like I resonated a lot with what you were saying today, Juan, around that stuff. Yeah.
I'm very grateful for this session today. Many thoughts are coming up for me. And I become sad when I see the large volumes of tax dollars being spent on the things that actually do not work. And I have looked at how is it then that we could make a change, and I am encouraged to move forward with Robert's words, do it anyways, and that's why we're all here. And I pick up on Juan's words when you said that we're doing it, but we're not always good at articulating it. Because when we're talking about values and having a values-based process, it often isn't the words. And that what really counts can't really be counted. And when I think about values or people having a human values approach, I think that I look at it more in what they do, how they behave. In our restorative justice language, we call it ways of being, in the way we are. And that's where we have that silent communication with those that are on that wavelength, because we come from a same core value that through the process of circles or the nature of the work brings us to that value. So we use the word a lot, but when you're speaking to somebody new, how do you help them find themselves so they too can come to that value? Because those values are the most ancient on earth. Those are the teachings. It doesn't matter where you come from or what culture you come from. Those are the teachings. And some of us, among us, have maybe come further away from their teachings or have been disconnected. And it's a 20th century phenomena that we are a trauma-organized society, that we're all children of, you name it, residential schools, we're children of immigration, broken attachment, and ultimately even slavery. They say that it's so long ago, but the pain and the trauma that that caused at the time is still carried forward. And the evidence is in our society with all those things that we mention. The way we treat each other, the violence, the fear, and the way we are actually a consumer-addicted society because our empty cups can't get filled. We're perpetually hungry. In this territory, that's called Hulidim, the hungry ones. We've become a Hulidim society, that we're trying to fill that cup with sex, drugs, rock and roll, and big box stores, and it's still not enough. And so we're arriving at this collective wisdom that we can only bring together when we come together and when we do the work. When the elders say, do the work, just keep doing it. Thank you, Robert, for that.
There's been some incredible stuff here today, and when Daryl was asking about, you know, who's been here for 2 years and 5 years and 10 years, we all have been in that place of our hand was up for that first year. You know, we've all had 1 year, and we've stayed as a result of attraction, like the saying says. We're here because of attraction rather than promotion. And for many of us, our lives have been hugely impacted by being introduced to this way of being, and it's for, I'm sure, all of us, it's a way of being. And we continue going to those open doors, and we ask the small places and the big places if we can come on alongside of them and work with them. And I think we are collectively and individually, I think we're all doing that in the way that we can, in the doors that have been opened for us, and the teachers that have showed us to help bring us here today. And I know it's working. It's not working half as fast as I'd like. And you know, I'm in a classroom that in 9 weeks they've had 7 teachers, grade 5, 6, right? But so, and I would like to be there from 8:30 till 3, but I have 1 hour twice a week, and that's what we're doing. It's a start. It's giving, and it's sharing, and being with them, and they just love a circle. So I just want to thank everybody for staying because of the attraction, and we just keep working hard at being alongside of all those agencies that need us so bad.
It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Alana. I guess what I'm reflecting on, over the summer I had the opportunity to take some time to look at the 3 of the tributary streams of restorative justice, how we've defined it in this culture. Maori tradition, First Nations, or Indigenous traditions from Western Canada, as well as Mennonite traditions. And through that exploration, I was reminded of the fact that justice isn't something that is only evoked when a harm happens or a crime happens, that it is a way of being with ourselves and with our communities every day. And the moment that we start to think about restorative justice as only that which is a diversion to or an inclusion into this justice system, we've just completely missed the potential. And I think what Juan's writing and what he said today, there's so many lessons that we need to learn from the New Zealand and Australian experience for Canada. I feel grateful that we're not in a place of complete professionalization. I feel grateful that there's so many communities that are engaged in this work. And it's critical that we are reflective practitioners. And so these opportunities and opportunities to learn from international stories and our local stories are opportunities to reflect and be critical practitioners so that we don't do further harm. And that we can see restorative justice and remind each other to see restorative justice as something much broader than an alternative to what we do with this archaic criminal justice system we have, or injustice system. I really liked what Juan said about how restorative justice can be seen as a little process to deal with a little incident with a little group of people. And I think that for me as a practitioner, I know that I'm guilty of doing that. And yet it's frustrating because there's so much more potential. And so I want to engage with that broader potential for transformative justice in the work that we do. And while restorative justice is, I think, as it's currently practiced, is a way of getting to that transformative place, we've got a long way to go, and I'm grateful to be reminded of that, and I'm grateful to know that I'm not alone in that. That's why we're all here. So, thank you.
I was just thinking about the whole issue of gangs and what Juan mentioned about overestimating the numbers. Personally, we all hate all these violent movies, but we also, I think it's much more of a rush when I talk about, yeah, today I talked to 2 gang members versus, oh, today I talked to 2 people at school and, you know, they were walking together and creating trouble for everyone, you know. It's a lot more interesting and gets more attention for me to talk about 2 gang members. It also reminded me of just Recently, I had a conference with a couple people, and one of them, he mentioned, you know, I was just walking with somebody. He's one of those people who looks a little different. 5th grade. He was pulled over along with the other person, accused of being part of a gang. And he was like, I was just walking with him, chatting with him. And then went through suspension and everything else. For me, it resonates with what you mentioned about, what Alana just mentioned about is justice is not only, it shouldn't only involve when you're having an incident. These guys, to me, it seemed they were having problems with feeling like injustice being done to them, at least in the school, in a certain way. They feel like justice is not being promoted in their environment, in their community. They feel left out. They feel accused of stuff. Plus, what we do, instead of saying, okay, there is a problem with these guys, 2 kids, getting together, beating up another kid, we say, oh, we have a problem with gangs in school. So whether we like it or not, bit by bit, joining a gang wouldn't be as big of a problem as we thought it would be. Based on your definition, I was a member of 2 gangs when I was in my early teens. In a way, I think we're pushing kids because it's good, it gets money, it gets attention, it gets our name in the 3rd page of the paper instead of the 5th or 6th page. So yeah, we discuss gangs. What I think we can do is just try to see the basic values, basically connect to people, connect to them better, just listen to them. Put the effort to listen to them and give them value, give them, this is something we all know, but just connecting to them will make a difference, just listening to them, valuing, respecting where they come from. And instead of, and this is an earlier age, the sooner it's done, the better, of course. To have these programs, of course, we need money, which goes back to what I said. Where do we get the money and how can we push the governments to put more money into this? I think that makes a big difference, but nothing replaces the grassroots level efforts that we're putting in there. Nothing.
I have 2 things I want to comment on. One is values. Most of you know that I come from a human services and a social services perspective as opposed to a criminal justice system. And when we dealt with young people from a human services perspective, our value base that we started our outreach work, and many other people did also, was the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Values-based that prioritizes young people's right to have security, to have family, to have a voice in the decisions that affect their lives. And every country in the world has signed it except for Zimbabwe and the United States. So that's the values. In the vision, I think what I'm hearing here is something that's being reflected in a lot of places, I think. That move that one of my favorite theorists, Clay Shirky, talks about, which is the move from institutional organization to collaborative environments. The move from creating silos and specific places of professionalization for people to move forward, as opposed to groups who can voluntarily contribute their energy and move movement forward. The scary part for everyone is, how are we all going to get paid? Because the old systems say that you become a professional at something, you live within an institution, but I guess my question to the restorative justice practitioners here is, if you're talking about taking RJ mainstream, why? Because the mainstream is failing. We don't have, there's not the resources, there's not the will, and we're changing the way we structure our societies and our thoughts to the point that going mainstream isn't a goal that's going to be sustainable. If you form an institution around an idea, the first goal of that institution becomes self-preservation and fundraising, and the second goal becomes whatever the reason is that you formed the institution. If we look at, just one example before I let you go, photography used to be a profession that you trained for. I went to journalism school in the mid-'80s to become a photographer. Now there's Flickr, and anyone who can take a photograph can upload to the web and contribute, and we can all have a piece of that. It's the deprofessionalization of many things that are occurring, and I think it's moving from institutional models to collaborative models. And the challenges for the criminal justice system as well as the human services system is to find new ways to deal with the revenue issues and the sustainability issues, but I don't think that we're going to be able to argue with the shift.
I would like to celebrate, first of all, our gathering, your being here, your generosity with your time and with your wisdom. There's a number of organizations that I think you saw from the program that have come together here to make this possible. District of Mission has provided this at no charge for our use today. Our coffee came from our local community champion and Coffee King, Dave Perrin at Grabba Jabba. Thank you, Dave. There's a number of organizations represented here, community justice initiatives from Langley and North Van Restorative Justice. The Fraser Basin Council is here, John Howard of the Fraser Valley. Solos Society, Safe Online Outreach. And really, I think this is in a way, well, it reminds me of a Forum Theatre event we had where there was about 8 different organizations said, you know, we can do this together. It's an event like this is not necessarily an easy thing to do when there's only a few people doing it, but when people are willing to take a bit of the load, well, anyways, they unfold, I think, in a way that's a lot more fun and it's quite a bit easier. I'd like to also thank Heartspeak Productions, deep appreciation for their years of commitment to gathering and sharing the wisdom that's out there for the benefit of all of us. Thank you so much. Juan, thank you so much for your generosity in sharing your time and wisdom. It sounds like you've been a very busy camper, and I do appreciate you taking time to be with us today.